Among the many criticisms that atheists have against religion, one of the most uncomfortable for Christians is the existence of God's wrath. As much as we'd like to look to Jesus and say that God is loving and merciful, there are more than enough instances, in the Old Testament and New, of God's anger leading to punishment, even condemnation.
And the invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish, where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you.
For atheists, this is an example of cognitive dissonance, of religious people holding contradictory beliefs. How can a God be loving and care for everyone, while at the same time killing and condemning? When we read stories like the flood that wiped out all but a few creatures on earth, what God did to the Egyptian people, most of which had nothing to do with Pharaoh, how he wiped out entire people so that Israel could have their own land, how he allowed his own people to be destroyed and sent into slavery a few hundred years after saving them from slavery, all for, checks notes, not giving him absolute obedience and following without question, the God of the Old Testament seems less of an all-loving God and more like a crazy tyrant. And lest we think that there are two gods or try to focus only on Jesus, remember his words to the Pharisees. Remember his threats of burning in a fiery Gehenna. One could definitely argue that Jesus' wrath was worse than that of the Old Testament because his punishment extended even after death. While atheists have a number of spurious arguments against religion that are easily dismissed, this is not one of them. This is a legitimate question that we have to be able to reconcile in ourselves. How do we understand God's wrath in the light of a belief that God is all-loving? Put another way, how can punishment, how can hell exist if God is love? For me, it's actually a really simple question to answer. There's no need for advanced theological degrees or mental gymnastics of interpreting certain words in certain ways. It comes down to remembering one simple fact. God is the source of all goodness. Not God is a good guy like you and me, not God does good things from time to time. God is the source of goodness, the originator of all that is good. God is goodness in God's very self, meaning that anything and everything that is good in this world is good precisely because God has made it such, and it continues to participate in God's goodness. A helpful analogy some like to use is to think of God as a power plant. Anything that is hooked up to its cables and receives electricity can work. The lights illuminate, the Wi-Fi sends out its signal. But these things are never independent of that power. You can't decide that you're just not going to pay your electric bill and go home and watch Netflix in peace on your own. As soon as the cables are disconnected, the power shuts off. To the extent that we are alive and good and enjoy goodness around us is the result of our being plugged into the source of goodness itself. When we act with generosity, sharing what we have with others, indulge in humorous situations with a laugh, admire a beautiful sunset, experience pleasure, literally anything that is good, we are experiencing something that God created, that God is a part of, a shadow of God's very self. This is true for all things in the outside world, but also the very nature of ourselves. If there is something good about us, something that we like and are proud of, something that brings us joy, it exists because, and only because, God created and dwells in us. And so, what would happen if we said no to that? We said, no, I don't want that, thank you. I don't want your goodness. I'd prefer to follow my own path and think of myself first. Well, I think the same thing that happens when we say that to our electric company. We get cut off. The beauty of God's love for us is that he respects our free will. God doesn't want automated cyborgs that are programmed for perfect obedience. He wants free-thinking, free-loving beings that have a choice. Choice to love and choice to walk away. God created us and gives us life, but he does not make us love him. That decision is up to us. But that decision is not without consequences. If we choose to deny him, the source of goodness, then the logical conclusion is that he won't make us accept goodness. He'll take it back because we clearly don't want it. And so think about what that looks like. For a thought experiment, think about all the good things about yourself. Your generosity, sense of humor, friendliness, good looks, wisdom, imagination, whatever it is that you like about yourself. Now imagine yourself without any of those things. You decide to cut yourself off from the goodness grid. What are you left with? You're left with jealousy, anger, anxiety, selfishness, greed, and a host of other deformed attributes. You'd be left with a shadow of yourself, consumed entirely inward, hating everything and everyone, including yourself. For how could you not? There's no more goodness in you, no more presence of God animating your soul. All that's left is not goodness. In the famous book, The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis presents a chilling description of just this. Sort of a poor man's Dante's Inferno, he describes a man's journey from hell to heaven. Because hell is the absence of good, a place where God does not exist, he describes a place where everyone has everything they want, but are never satisfied because nothing is real. A place where there are no neighbors, everyone just moves farther and farther apart so that they never have to interact. Where people do nothing but pace back and forth, muttering about the ways they've been wronged, plotting their revenge. What I love about this story, and the key to the question at hand, is that hell is not something inflicted on us by God. It's not a punishment or direct result of God's wrath. As Lewis puts it, hell is locked from the inside. People exist there because they want nothing to do with God, and so God honors that decision. They exist in a place where God doesn't dwell, a place without goodness. As much as some would have you believe that God is a wrathful being in heaven, looking down upon his people ready to smite them, and some would genuinely like that idea, I don't think that can be reconciled with the God of love and mercy we see throughout Scripture. Atheists are right to point out the cognitive dissonance, but I think that they're wrong to believe that our suffering and punishment is a vindictive result of God's anger towards us. When we look to stories like the floods, the plagues, the destruction of peoples, our immediate reaction may be to accuse God of injustice, to call him a tyrant. What gives him the right to take so many lives? As products of pluralistic societies, we insist that people be given a right to act and worship how they like without threat of punishment, or worse, genocide. But God is not a human ruler. God is not about pluralism. He's the source of all truth and goodness and life. You can't just respectfully choose to go your own direction without consequences, to say, I think I'll follow my own moral code, worship my own God. When you say no to the power grid, you get cut off. Not as an act of vengeance, not because God is angry or jealous, but because this is what you have chosen. If you don't want goodness, then you won't get goodness. A point that we can understand well before we die. I think the thing that we need to realize, and the point of making this video, is that the hell Lewis described in his book doesn't have to be in a future reality alone. It's a choice that so many of us are making on a regular basis, inflicting punishment upon ourselves. When we choose to be greedy, spiteful, lustful, selfish, or anything else against the will of God, we are bound to experience some level of suffering because sin is its own punishment. When we sin, we say no to God. We say no to goodness. We dim the power of the house of our soul ever so slightly, leaving us with less than what we had before. The feelings of remorse, dread, anger, jealousy, envy, hatred, and emptiness that we feel after doing something wrong are not so much God smiting us as they are the direct result of dimming the power, as direct as the pain we would feel if we touched the burner on the stove. Now, I will say, as a final note, that I do believe that God admonishes. Scripture mentions on numerous occasions that God specifically inflicts punishment on certain people, and that can't be completely discounted. I do believe that some of this is metaphorical anthropomorphisms of God, trying to make sense of natural disasters and human evil, but some of it is surely the work of God. This, however, is not a problem for me. Just as a parent corrects their child, so too does God correct his children. Sometimes this involves pain and suffering. Sometimes it means being temporarily cut off from the good things we want. But just as a good parent acts, it is never retributive. It's never punishment for the sake of pain or suffering out of a love for evil. As the 1 Samuel canticle sings, he humbles only to exalt us. For me, it's not a God that oscillates between love and hatred, one moment caring, the next moment flying off the handle. There is only one God who cannot change, only one ever-present movement of God, and that is love. He wants nothing more than for us to return to him, and so he continues to chase after us, continues to show us mercy, continues to offer goodness even when we turn it down. The power plant is always on, offering us electricity. To the extent that we experience punishment for our actions is not evidence of God having a mood swing, but rather the natural effect of turning from God. The power plant is working, but if we unplug our devices, we won't. Rather than blame the power plant, it might be good to ask ourselves the very embarrassing question, are you sure your device is plugged in?